Hello, everyone. I think most of you know I'm Monisha Rao, one of IFA's Sevaks. And I really want to thank all of you for coming and being here today. I know it's a weekday, I know it's a Monday after a long holiday weekend, but we are all here today because we have a very special treat. We are so lucky to have with us the renowned journalist, Mr. P. Sainath. And it's truly my honor and privilege to say a few words about him. P. Sainath, as most of you probably know, is the founding editor of the People's Archives of Rural India. The archive is an outcome of his 3 decades in journalism and reporting from rural India. 2/3 of the Indian population is rural. And as far as the corporate media is concerned, rural India doesn't get any coverage. They're not even on their radar. It's this failure of corporate media to cover the 2/3, over 800 million people from India, that has led Mr. Sainath to create this archive with a goal to report on and record this large chunk of India and bring to light the everyday lives and struggles of the everyday people. Mr. Sainath is the former Rural Affairs editor of The Hindu and is a 2007 winner of the Ramon Magsaysay Award, the most prestigious award celebrating transformative leadership. He was the first reporter in the world to win Amnesty International's Global Award for Human Rights Journalism in its inaugural year in 2000. He has taught journalism schools in India and abroad. His book, Everybody Loves a Good Drought, is now in its 43rd print and was declared a Penguin Classic in the year 2013. This book is actually being used in over 100 journalism schools across the world. His photo archive of black and white images from rural India is being digitized, and one part of it, Visible Work, Invisible Women, is one that all of you must have seen as we shared it in our email. There's something that I've been thinking about a lot, and I thought I'd share it with all of you. About 2 months ago, there was the world premiere of Anand Patwardhan's film, The World is Family, and it happened at the Indian Film Festival of Los Angeles. And actually, by the way, IFA was proud to be a community partner for that premiere. And the film was a personal film about his family's involvement with Gandhi and the freedom struggle. And then about 2 weeks ago, IFA had another guest speaker, Professor Jagmohan, Shaheed Bhagat Singh's nephew, who spoke about the freedom struggle. And then here we are today with Mr. Sainath, whose new book is about the freedom fighters. So it made me wonder if this was just coincidence or if it has something to do with what is happening in India and where India and our democracy stands today. Maybe there's sort of an internal freedom struggle of the classes, of the haves and have-nots going on, and this is for us to learn lessons to help with the current situation and the current struggle. Anyhow, this was something that came to me, so I wanted to share, and I'm actually curious. I'd love to hear what Mr. Sainath thinks and what his thoughts are on this. So before I call him up, I just want to say we have some of his books up on the table. If anybody would like, please, you're welcome to take a book. They are $20, and any further donation is always welcome. There's a QR code that you can scan and send the money that way, or we can have a sign-up sheet and we can talk about the payment that way. So finally, please join me in welcoming here Mr. Sainath so he can share his life and work with us.
Thank you very much, Manisha. I will rearrange the beginning so that we start answering the question you posed straight away. Last August 2022, India completed 75 years of independence. It is actually the 76th anniversary, but completion of 75 years. Now, this year we had the 77th anniversary. Like many important anniversaries, like Tagore's 150th or Gandhi's 150th, normally a nation, our nation, takes those on for 3 years. You have a 3-year celebration of something. In our case, the government of India began a website, Azadi Ka Amrut Mahotsav. And this website, which I'll show you, came at an incredible cost. The first tranche of the Azadi Ka Amrut Mahotsav, of just that event, was 110 crores or 1,100 million rupees. I'd give anything to have 5% of that for People's Archive, which is a permanent creation and not for 3 years. Now, the astonishing thing about this website of the Government of India, it's supposed to celebrate and observe 75 years of independence and the freedom struggle and honor your freedom fighters. Astonishingly, the website and an Azadi Ka Amrut Mahotsav of 110 crores does not have a single photograph, not a single video, not a single statement, article, quote on, by or of, not a single picture of a living freedom fighter. Not one. Are there many living freedom fighters? Not many, but there are 15 of them in this book. Okay? So 8 have died since the book went to print and was published. But 7 or 8 and one whole village still very alive, very articulate, very outspoken. And then you can find all the other names of freedom fighters on the pension list. There's a special pension. There are both state lists and central lists. Not a single person from any of these is on the website. Not one video, not one photograph. I'm not saying there are no photographs on the website. There are thousands of photographs. You all know whose photographs. Now let's take the home page. I made some slides for you, but I'm also going to take you to the live site so that you can see for yourself whether, now you look at the home page. There's Mr. Modi, there's Mr. Modi, there's Mr. Modi here, there's Mr. Modi below, and just in case you missed him, there's another Mr. Modi there, and one video of Mr. Modi at the bottom, cut off there. Okay. And if you scroll down, don't be disappointed, you will see Mr. Modi. And you will see Mr. Modi. And we did a very interesting thing with this website. Now this website is meant to honor your 75 years of independence, but what did we do with it? We equated that 75 years of independence with the G20 program in Delhi. And please look at the top. We have given a G20 logo, equal space, equal dimensions, next to the Freedom Fighters website. So G20, because it's headed by your Prime Minister, is as important as 75 years of Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. Also notice that the G20 logo undergoes a change when it's put up here. It's based on the Kamal, on the lotus, and you know whose electoral symbol that is. Right? So there are lots of photos, the same photo that has been on every single COVID vaccine certificate issued in the country. And that if things go the same way next of April, could well be on every bus ticket in the country. You know how many hundreds of photographs there are on this side of this? Anyway. So that is how Indian officialdom has commemorated 75 years of Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. This book is about ordinary people. It challenges the great man theory of history, which is that a handful, maybe one individual, one messiah came along and freed your nation. You know, it's a very interesting thing, and it says something good about India's great historic figures, that every one of them denounced the great man theory. From Gandhi to Bhagat Singh, they all rejected it. Yeah. Though we seem to be embracing it in the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. So anyway, the great man theory, or in India's case, great men theory, primarily consists of a few charismatic individuals or one messiah coming back. Always, we attribute even our freedom. So great is the racial inferiority complex of this nation that we even attribute our freedom to England. Who are the people who led your country? They're all people who went and studied in Oxford and Cambridge. And you'll read it in your textbooks. There they read Rousseau and Voltaire and Hobbes and Locke and learned about ideas of freedom as if no such thing ever existed in your country or your society. Yeah? So even there you're attributing your achievement to the colonial power. In the great men themselves, Gandhi, 1914, on his way back from South Africa after the stunning struggle of the indentured laborers in South Africa, Gandhi is stopping in England and being praised to the skies at a huge meeting in London. The elite Labour Party, members of Parliament, aristocracy, the liberal aristocracy, Sarojini Naidu, one of the organizers of it, and if speaker after speaker is praising Gandhi for the victory of the Labour in South Africa. When Gandhi takes the podium, he straight away says, your felicitations are directed to the wrong address. I was just their vakil. I was their face. The victory in South Africa was entirely the doing of the indentured laborers themselves. And he gives a number of stories from there. Probably the most moving of those stories is one of a Sardar called Hati Singh, 75 years old. 75 years old, a freed indentured laborer. He didn't have to be in the fight. He went back to Punjab. I think Gurdaspur was his native place. He is with his grandchildren, great-grandchildren, he's 75 years old. But when the indentured laborer struggle breaks out, he goes back to South. It's not a joke in 1913 to catch a boat and go to South Africa. Okay, it was a very, very big journey. But he goes back, and he lands up in the struggle, sharing a cell with a fellow called Mohandas Karamchand, who is very angry at Hathi Singh. He's scolding Hathi Singh. And he says, and all this he is narrating while tears are down his cheeks when he's talking about Hathi Singh. He says, in the cell I told him, Hathi Singh, you were free. You were with your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren. Why did you have to come, how could you come back here? And Hathi Singh told him, Mohandas, how could I not come back? When my people are in struggle, how could I not come back? Remember, that was also a message to a Gandhi who was coming back to India. Yeah? He was a barrister earning 15,000 pounds a year, which was a hell of a lot of money in 1914. But he came back to his country, Gandhi. And so he narrates the story of Hathi Singh, and I find that a very moving story, that a 75-year-old, after being freed from indenture, goes back to fight alongside his colleagues and comrades. In 1931, Prema Bai Kantak writes a very glowing letter to Gandhi. 1915 is a very important year. Till that year, he is Mohandas Karamchand. Where does he go? He goes to Champaran in Bihar and witnesses and is immersed in the struggle of very ordinary people. It's from there that he makes a transition from Mohandas to Mahatma. And in 1930, because that day in Champaran, Gandhi realizes what he's been thinking about since South Africa. Only the laboring classes, the farmers, the workers have the energy to free your country. Nobody else does. And in 1931, when Prema Bai Kantak praises him, he's in Yerwada jail, in Yerwada prison, Maharashtra. And Prema Bai is praising him and saying, you have made revolution. And typical Gandhi turns the postcard of paper and writes one line on the back, which the book introduction begins with, though it's not the first page. The introduction to the book begins there. Incidentally, Professor Jagmohan Singh has written the foreword for this book. And the introduction, the line that he writes in reply to Prema Bai's praise, he says, great men appear to be the cause of revolutions in the world. In truth, the people themselves are the cause. That's all. Just very typical of Gandhi. One line reply. Great men. Then comes Bhagat Singh. I mean, I could give you many of the other great men, Ambedkar, others who denounced the great man theory. But we embraced it in our history, in our writing. We're embracing it in the Azadi Ka Amrut Mahotsav website. A new generation of kids could be forgiven for thinking that Mr. Narendra Modi was your primary freedom fighter, though he was born after 1947. So, yeah, well, what would your kids think if they saw that website? Yeah. And it's got tens of millions of views. Okay. Then, because in schools and colleges, they make them look at it. Then, Bhagat Singh, in prison, having an exchange with his dear friend, Pandit Shiv Varma, and they're discussing the role of revolutionaries in the struggle for freedom. And Bhagat Singh says, we revolutionaries are we are ornaments. We are the gems on the building. We neither constructed its edifice nor its foundation. the foundation of the building that was laid by the struggle of ordinary masses. That's who they did. Yeah? So you see, the great men themselves disown the great man theory of history, but we swing to it. We cling to it. In this book, the freedom fighters are cooks, couriers, homemakers, farmers, laborers, carpenters, malis, and their role in the struggle. In a while, I will tell you the stories of some of them. Second, we completely, in the writing of history is always an act of the victor. You know, there's a very beautiful, history is written by the victor. So, those at the forefront in 1947, those who came to positions of power, created a history which made us believe all sorts of rubbish. Though in the late 1960s and up to mid-70s, India produced outstanding historians, great historians, like Romila Thapar, Harbans Mukhia, S. Bhattacharya, and K.M. Panikkar. Yeah? All their books, by the way, have been removed from the curriculum. NCRT will no longer publish Bipin Chandra's books on Indian nationalism and the freedom struggle. Nothing. They're all gone. So, anyway, these people were, for the greater part of history, marginalized. Another group totally marginalized in your freedom struggle is women freedom fighters. You ask any kid who's been going to school regularly and listening to whatever is said there, ask them to make a list of 5 or 10 names associated with the freedom struggle. You'll not get a single woman's name in it. Because we built, again, written by the victor, we have 2 laws, 1972 and then replaced in 1980, on freedom fighters, recognition and pension. The 1980 law is called Swatantrata Samman, Swatantrata Sainik Samman Yojana. Okay? The way we defined it, I call it, they put many clauses, you've got to be in adherence or in somewhere you've got to fit with those clauses. There are 7 things and one of those you have to fit with, I call it the 7 laws of bureaucratic suffering. The huge error the country made was to link recognition and pension. And because many people rejected the pension. N. Sankaraya in this book, who died 2 weeks ago at 102, he says in the book, we fought for freedom, not for pensions. But when they rejected the pension, the recognition also went, those were all tied together. So, the meaning official recognition was lost. Right? So, that is one of the stupidest. And in those laws, we created it so that it basically defines male roles in the freedom struggle. Tens of millions of women in India fought as bravely, took as great risks, maybe greater risks than the men did in many cases. You'll find 5 of them in this book, one of whose stories I will tell you about. But anyway, so the great man theory was one problem. The other was the idea that Indian independence was achieved by a bunch of returning Oxbridge elites. You know? And this book sets out to demolish that, and I think it does a fair job of that. For me, the most important thing in my book, and most important thing, the spectrum of freedom fighters, apart from 5 women, the whole telling of our freedom struggle, you'll see if you ask people to list names, it will be a bunch of upper caste, Oxbridge educated people. We have marginalized the role of the Adivasis, who were the first to die for freedom, the last to benefit from it. Okay? We have completely marginalized the role of Dalits, and Dalits and Adivasis started fighting the British much earlier, when the rest of us were still trying to negotiate our place in the hierarchy. The Indian freedom struggle did not begin with 1857. Within 3 years of the Battle of Plassey, 1757, by 1760, the Dalits and Adivasis and Dalits more correctly, of the Jungle Mahal region, Purulia and partly in Bihar, partly in West Bengal, they fought with axes and bows against cannon and artillery. Yeah? And 40 years they fought. And you can see how nasty historians, the victorious historians have been. It's written about them. And you know what the rebellion is called? Those of you from Bengal might know it. No. Santal Hul comes later. This is from 1760 to 1806. Okay. It's called the Chuar Rebellion, which is a mix of Chor and Neech. It immediately tells you the background of the people fighting. It means Adivasis and Dalits. The Chuar Rebellion. 40 years they fought till their armed might was wiped out. They never once compromised with the British, who were already introducing new land revenue methods in the Jungle Mahal areas. So it's not, then comes after this. Oh, by the way, by the 1790s, another thing, we think freedom struggle happened in UP and Bihar. Yeah, South didn't do much. Long before, 60 years before the first shot was fired in 1857, Tipu Sultan became the only Indian prince to die fighting on the battlefield. Nobody else. Nobody else. And 1790s, you have 1780s and 90s, you have the most incredible revolts in the south, led by Veerapandya Kattabomman of Tamil Nadu. Kattabomman's rebellion brought the East India Company to the brink of collapse. Until, by the way, he was betrayed by the Raja of Pudukkottai. That's how he was defeated. He was betrayed by the Raja of Pudukkottai and assisted by the Raja of Ramnad. Let that also be fairly said. Ramnad and Pudukkottai were contending kingdoms, and though they were related. So this was Kattabomman in 1790s. You have a phenomenal series of struggles from the Chuar rebellion. Millions of people died. Now, when I brought this book out, it's only 11 months since the book came out. It's in its 5th edition. By the way, the entry on Wikipedia is a bit dated. Good Drought is in its 61st edition. Yeah. It's about ordinary people. Everyday lives, everyday people. Now, in the freedom struggle, who were these spectrum of fighters? Adivasis, Dalits, Hindus, Muslims, Sikhs, Christians, Buddhists, atheists in very large numbers. Yeah? Atheists, all of them, you'll find them in this book. Okay. Yet another thing is the geographical, everyone thinks that all of it, in Punjab there was the Gadar rebellion, then it was over, and then it was UP and Bihar. There are people linked to the Gadar rebellion as well. But the book has people from north, south, east, west, northwest. Unfortunately, the 2 people I was interviewing in the northeast died in the COVID period. Not of COVID, they died of old age. Both were at 100 and they were articular. but I lost them. And I think the greatest single thing I learned from these people and from the book, and which links back to your question, every one of them makes a distinction. Anyone goes and talks to them, you go talk to them, they will make it a point to tell you the distinction between independence and freedom. And every one of them will tell you this is not the same thing. Therefore, the book begins on a separate page, one line. Captain Bhav. His real name was Ramchandra Shripati Lad. He died last year. And Captain Bhav, when I was praising him, I didn't know he was alive. Found him. One of his achievements was to conduct the biggest train robbery India had ever seen. Yeah. They robbed the Pune Miraj goods train, and they lifted the payroll of the British Empire for the Bombay Presidency. I mean, whatever was on that train that time, and the money they lifted enabled them to buy 70,000 kilograms of rice. Remember, it was Bengal famine time, 1943 June. So anyway, they did that. When I was praising him about his role in the freedom struggle, he held up his hand. You know, my meeting with him was beautiful. When we went to his home, his family told me, you know, some days he is very clear, some days he loses it. At that, he was already 94. They said, there are days when he is crystal clear, and there are days when he's not there. So what we did, we took his own chair from home. Yeah, we drove him and his chair and placed his chair at the very spot on the railway tracks where he had hit the British train 94 years earlier, 74 years earlier. And he was the leader of one or two squads. There were two squads which hit that train without a gun. They did it with stones, axes, lathis. And you can see him in the video that I'll show you, explaining how they did it. And when I was praising him, he said, hold on. And that line which he said, the book starts on a separate page with that line. We fought for two things, freedom and independence. We achieved independence. We fought for two things, freedom and independence. We achieved independence. Every one of them in different words and different languages tell you the same thing, which is that for them, independence was an event. Freedom is a process. And maybe one that will never be completed in our lifetimes, but you fight for it. Does that answer your question? Okay, so he said every one of them tells you that independence, what was independence? Independence was about kicking out the colonial ruler and forming a nation state based on citizens' rights, which are in very serious danger right now. But it was about kicking out the foreign ruler and founding a nation state based on citizens' rights. Freedom, they tell you, is a much more complex project. It's a much more complicated process. And it doesn't come with the foreign ruler leading you. It does. That's not so. All of them, all these are freedom fighters, some of whom have been since then, since the book received real recognition, and who are anyway recognized in one or two of the history books like Sankaraya is, Madurai conspiracy case, that sort of a thing, that negative recognition. But all of them are united on this from north, south, east, west, northwest of the country. Independence is an event, freedom is a process. Independence you have achieved, freedom you aspire for. And then we can discuss what they understand as freedom. So that's yet another thing. Now, when the book came out, From then, I've been visiting. I have visited more than 40 campuses, colleges, universities in India. And I hang my head in shame at how we have erased our freedom struggle. I asked the kids, so what are we celebrating? Because it was still 75 years. What are we celebrating when we celebrate, Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav? Many hands go up. So we are celebrating the fact that we kicked out the British and got independence in 1947. Okay. Next question. Why did we kick out the British? What did they ever do to you? Much fewer hands go up this time. In your Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav website, there is not one line about what British colonialism did to this country. You'd think that a website on freedom and independence would tell you why you were fighting. Not one line, not one paragraph about British colonialism and what it did. So I asked the kids, what did they do that was so bad? I mean, apart from the fact that they're a repulsive bunch of assholes, what have you got against them? 2, 3 hands. The hands that go up are those who have been taught the new economics of the last 30 years. Sir, they imposed unfair terms of trade on India. Yeah? Lots of nations still are doing that to lots of other nations. Did it lead to 2 centuries of struggle? Okay. Then some of the kids who've been keeping silent because they're afraid that they will tell you the wrong thing. And I say that, the only people who don't make mistakes are those who do nothing. So take a shot, and then some answers begin to come. And it's always very interesting where they got their information from. Sir, my grandfather or my great-grandmother told me that the British had committed many atrocities in the country and millions of people died. Now they're having to learn this from their families, not from the school, not from the textbook. And at the end of every such meeting, I have exhorted the kids. You guys are so young, some of you have not only grandparents, you have great-grandparents, undergrad kids, 17, 18. They have I said, I want every kid to go back home and engage with your great-grandparents and grandparents. Ask them to tell you, and you will find one thing. Every family has a story. There is a small percentage which has stories they would rather not reveal because they were collaborators of the British Empire. But every family, your freedom struggle was so widespread, so bottom-up, so all-encompassing. Yeah? Every family has a story. I come from a freedom fighters family, grew up to stories of that. Now we have stopped telling our kids those stories. When I went to school and college, when I went to Presentation Convent of the Sacred Heart in Chennai, we still had lines in the book, in our history book. The sun never sets on the British Empire. Yeah? Favorite line of history books. I think many heads are nodding. You also have seen that in your school books. My grandfather went as a young law student to Dublin, and he got carried away by the Irish freedom struggle, joined the revolutionaries, ran into the Easter uprising, was very lucky not to be shot dead in a firing squad because of various forces intervening for him, for his close mate, and he also got up and was deported to India. I prefer the Irish version of "the sun never sets on the British Empire." You know what the Irish revolutionaries used to say? The sun never sets on the British Empire. Because even God can't trust those bastards in the dark. And that is absolutely true. By the way, many Irishmen died fighting the British in India. Something that's not known. How many rebellions there were in the British colonial army where the first thought of this book came to me in 1982. As a rookie reporter, I went to Meerut where there had been horrible communal violence. Horrible. Basically a pogrom in which far more Muslims were killed than Hindus. Yeah. I was just devastated by it because I had learned a different history where Meerut was a symbol of unity, not of hatred. Yeah. So I went there and I saw something very interesting in Meerut. Alas, all gone to the real estate developers now. I saw a number of graves. Only the name and the year. O'Hanlon, 1857. O'Grady, 1858. O'Rourke, O'Callaghan. All Irish names. The year of death given, but nothing, who they were, what they were. Now, if you were an Irishman in India in 1857, you could only have been a soldier. The Irish had no businesses to run. They were forced to conscript in the British Army. The British created the great potato famine in that country once to increase recruitment to the armed forces. Now, I kept wondering, who were these people? I had some idea because my PhD thesis, which I never gave in, was on revolts in the British Indian colonial army. Now, why were they not buried in the cantonment? Why were they outside the cantonment? I think it's one of the most brilliant moments in history. In 1857, remember the uprising began in Meerut. Hindu soldiers joined Muslim soldiers and they marched on the British garrison. Right? They marched on the British garrison. So there was a column of Hindu soldiers, there was a column of Muslim soldiers. They had, by the way, joint eating camps. They stayed together. As they marched on the garrison was defended by a small frontline troops of Irish Roman Catholic soldiers. Irish Catholic soldiers. You know, the British, until they got us into their army, their main cannon fodder was Irish. One famous British general in Africa, when surrounded in a deadly situation, the only order he gave his lieutenant was, waste the Irish. Let them die. No? So these Irish, imagine for the moment, the drama. Irish Catholic soldiers. They didn't know who these Muslims were. They didn't know Urdu, Arabic, Persian or Hindustani. They didn't know who these Hindu soldiers were, which is, they didn't know Bhojpuri, Maithili or Magadhi or Awadhi. They didn't know any of these people. They knew of Islam vaguely because from the history of crusades in their own culture. But they didn't know Indian Islam. They didn't know a thing about Hindu or Hinduism. Eyeball to eyeball with the Hindu-Muslim rebels, at the last moment, the Irish frontline defenders of the garrison turned their guns on their British officers and shot them dead and joined the rebels. Now, the guys whose graves were outside, long since sacrificed to the real estate mafia of Meerut, they knew that they were going to die. One way or the other. Either they would die fighting the rebels or they would be punished and die at the hands of their British officers. They knew they were dead men, but they made a choice of making a statement of which side they would die on. You see, the Irish didn't know the Hindus, Muslims, Indians, Parsis, but the Irish knew who the enemy was. They had suffered colonialism 600 years before we did, and were still suffering colonialism. And even today, the Good Friday Pact, which brought peace to Northern Ireland, is in danger of collapse because of the Gaza conflict, new rules that the Western countries are putting up. Yeah? The Britisher, Mr. Rishi Sunak of Indian origin, is not repaying the favor of sacrifices that the Irish made in India. Why are the Irish pro-Palestinian and pro-Gaza? Because they were a colonial people for 800 years. They knew what colonialism was. They knew who the British were. If you listen to the famous John Lennon song, The Luck of the Irish, if you had the luck of the Irish, you'd be sorry and wish you were dead. If you had the luck of the Irish, you'd wish you were British instead. That would be John Lennon of Beatles fame. That was his song, The Luck of the Irish. And anyway, so I'm engaging the kids and asking them then I realized that one, you can't blame these kids. Theirs is a generation robbed of its history, and my generation did the robbing. So, after all, how many of our generations sitting here can summarize in 5 minutes or more what exactly the British did in your country? You say they looted and plundered our country, one of them said, kids said, older ones. Yeah, how much? Do you know there are estimates of what? Let me tell you brief, in 10 lines or 12 lines, what kind of things the British did. They brought 31 policy-induced famines to India. Exporting grain during World War II, when people were dying of hunger in Bengal, 4 million people died. By the way, that's one of the smaller famines. In British times, there were 31 famines, 24 of which were classified as major by British demographers, and involved millions of deaths. 1770, the first great Bengal famine. Those days, Bengal included Odisha, Bihar, all these places. Now the East India Company is ruling. You'd think one third of the province of Bengal dies. And Mr. Warren Hastings, in Baiju's online thing, Warren Hastings brought reforms to Indian agriculture and land relations. He brought reforms. Here is Mr. Hastings makes no such pretense. Here is a letter written excerpts from a letter written by Warren Hastings to the Board of Governors of the East India Company, actually called the Court of Directors, 1772. The famine begins in 69, 70 is full blown, 71, in 72 it ends. You know how many people died? 10 million is the British estimate. And it doesn't include those living beyond the borders of the province who also died. People died in Burma, damn it. Anyway, here's Warren Hastings. What is he saying about the deaths? He's boasting. He is boasting. Here, notwithstanding the loss of at least 1/3 of the inhabitants of the province, notwithstanding the consequent decrease of the cultivation as might be expected, notwithstanding the fact that we killed 1/3 of the population, notwithstanding the decrease in cultivation, net collections of revenue in the year 1772 exceeded even those of 1768. the last year before the great calamity. He's boasting. He's saying 1/3 of the farmers died, 1/3 of the cultivators died, 1/3 of the inhabitants died. He's saying cultivation decreased, but we increased the rents and revenue by beating the shit out of the remaining inhabitants, by torture, plunder, straight looting of food grain. Yeah? This is your British sense of fair play, sporting British Eton and Harrow culture. Yeah? He's boasting to his court of directors. 10 million people died, but we raised your revenue. Which is why, by the way, after he is tried and impeached in the British Parliament, the company gives him a huge pension for the rest of his life. Then, what was that was the first of the famines. Then comes the Doji Bada famine, the skull famine, because millions of skulls dotted the countryside. 12 million people, 11 million people died. 12 million people died in the Doji Bada famine. Then 1780s, Chalisa famine, 9 million people died. 1876, by the time you have, those of you who are from the south, your great-grandmothers and you had what was known as the Madras famine, the famine between Mysore and Madras. Okay? If you go to the books, if you go to the newspapers of that time, you will see they reporting much more honestly than the newspapers of our time. Yeah. They are pro-British, but they report what they see in terms of thousands of peasants are desperate to enter the cities of Madras and Mysore. The police have set up barricades and they are being clubbed to death at the barricades. Okay? Now the same newspapers will be covering, what was 1876? The year of the Grand Victoria Darbar, where she promotes herself from Queen of England to Empress of India. Yeah? Now the same newspapers report that with all due great pomp, pageantry. They report these famine deaths. They don't make the connection, because Victoria's Darbar was the costliest and remains the costliest party in recorded human history, with 68,000 guests from aristocracy alone. Now I don't believe that our Raja Rani Log went there as eco-tourism backpackers. Each of them went with an entourage, right? From the guy who fed the horses to the guy who cleaned the horse shed. Yeah? So you're talking about 250,000 human beings there. She did not herself come to India for the Darbar. She feared it would impair her fragile digestion. So she did come. She sent messages. And the only historian who has made the connection is, by the way, from the United States. He was in University of California, and his name is Mike Davis. And he wrote the book, Planet of Slums. He wrote an incredible book called Late Victorian Holocausts, where in the first 60 pages you get a description of what Indians were suffering from, why they were dying, why there was famine. He is quoting from the correspondence of how much money is diverted for the Darbar from what should have been there for the famine, for the ordinary people. But for Mike Davis's Late Victorian Holocaust, the connection between Victoria's Darbar and the Madras famine remains a secret of history. Call it Victoria's original secret. And so this was the kind of thing. 1840, the chairman of the East India and China Company, it was there, they had an East India and China. The chairman of the East India Company is boasting in Parliament. Here's what he says. This company, milords, this company actually has succeeded in converting India from a manufacturing country into a country merely exporting raw produce. When the British came to India, India accounted for between 18 and 24% of global GDP. What do you account for now? India and China accounted for bloody 40% plus of global GDP. And then come the wars, the plunders, the opium wars, the looting, the 31 famines. And by the time the British leave, when the British arrive, another little fact for you. British demographers show us that Indians' life expectancy was superior to that of Ireland, Scotland and Wales, and similar to that of England. 1921 census shows us Indian life expectancy 21 years and 9 months. Census conducted by the British. Okay? We keep the census of 1871 on the PARI website. You can go. Some of the questions they ask are more interesting than we have dropped those censuses, those questions in independent India. Like caste. They asked a number of questions about it. Then comes what was looted from India. You will never be able to quantify the British plunder of India. You will never be able to quantify it because how do you quantify ecological and environmental loot? How many thousands of British stately homes in the British countryside are built of Burma teak and Indian rosewood? The great Admiral Nelson in the Battle of Trafalgar, his entire fleet, the wood for his entire fleet came from one district in this country, used to be called Thane district in Maharashtra, but it came from a part which is today a separate district called Palghar. It's an Adivasi district. You destroyed all the Adivasi tribes of the area by looting their forests. And they are still the poorest people in the country. Even today, those Adivasi. And today, to this day, for Adivasi, government means forest department. Because that's who oppresses them. In British times, in our times. Then, oh, by the way, you know, our judges, even recently, quote Churchill on democracy. Here is what Churchill said about you. A beastly people with a beastly religion. The famine was their own fault for breeding like rabbits. This is the great Democrat Churchill. There's a very brilliant book by Madhushri Mukherjee, Professor Madhushri Mukherjee, who is an editor at Scientific American in New York. Churchill's Secret War. Read it. It sickens you to see the correspondence. His own senior-most aide is begging him to pay attention to the famine when he says this. Yeah? He didn't give a damn about it. Yeah, you quote him. He says, every tribesman who raises his hand against the empire shall be speared to death. This was the great Democrat. Then comes, how much was looted? So if some of you are aware that in 1905, Dadabhai Nauroji tried making an estimate. It was called the theory of the drain. I'm taking it that everybody knows who Dadabhai Nauroji was. In 1905, he's the man Gandhi called my teacher in economics. That's who Dadabhai Nauroji was. In Mumbai, you might have gone on the main road called DN Road, that is Dadabhai Nauroji Road. Dadabhai Nauroji calculated some obscene sum of pounds for a few years, but it was all about tariffs and duties. Professor Utsa Patnaik has done, you can get that book of 3-4 years ago, has done a painstaking amount, and she tells you, please know that this is not an accurate figure. It is a huge underestimate. How do you calculate Nelson's loot of the forests of Palghar? How do you calculate? Do you know how many of anyone here from Rajasthan? Okay, at least someone of you is familiar with the Bharatpur Bird Sanctuary in Alwar? Yeah? Have you seen there are 2-3 big tablets where the British colonels and generals and their Raja Rani friends boast how many thousands of birds they shot in 1 week?
Oh, yeah.
Right? Yeah. They wiped out whole species. Your crisis of, you needed a Project Tiger to deal with what the British, their Rajas and Ranis and their colonels and their generals shot thousands and thousands. They shot many species into extinction. Anyway, without counting any of this, just looking at 138 years on which solid data is available, Utsa Patnaik tells you the British looted how much? Today, every week, we boast India will be a $5 trillion economy. We even lied to ourselves last week. We have already touched 4 trillion. It's all nonsense. It's all complete nonsense. No tracking service and data service in the world shows you that. But once the Vishwa Guru has said it, then it cannot be questioned. So then, which means, and we are promising to be a $5 trillion economy by 2030. Actually by 2020, but we keep pushing the goalposts as we keep failing. The British looted 9 times that amount. They looted $44.6 trillion. In what the author tells you, please don't trust my figure, it's a huge underestimate. That's what Utsa Patnaik says. That it's an underestimate. There are many things. How do you quantify forests? How do you quantify water resources? How do you quantify the loot in that? Looting of India is not about the Kohinoor diamond, for God's sake. And the wealth of the British Empire did not come from King Solomon's mines. It came from the rack renting of the Indian peasantry, which very clearly the East India Company chairman and Warren Hastings have told you. This is where the money comes from. Okay? Do you know? It's coming to your question again in the present. The phenomenal struggle of the Kisan Andolan in India. I was called to speak there many times. Many of the Punjab farmers, etc., are known to me. I've been covering them as a journalist for 30 years. When I went on to the stage, it was a bright winter morning in Delhi, and something glare kept coming into my eyes. And what was it? It's like you're playing cricket, you're a batsman and someone's flashing a mirror in your eyes. Right? When I looked and then I went and saw who they were. 200 ex-servicemen sitting there in uniform with their medals from Havaldar to Brigadier General. And they told us, they said, while this government calls us Khalistanis, our sons and grandsons are on the borders defending you. Okay? That time it strikes me every now and then, whether at the time of 1857 or whether today, the Indian Jawan is a Kisan in uniform. That's who they are. The Indian Jawan is a Kisan. That's why Shastri came with that slogan, Jai Jawan, Jai Kisan. In 1991, we switched it for Jai Louis Vuitton. So that the Indian soldier in 1857, it was not the people of Meerut who rebelled. It was not the people of Lucknow and Kanpur who rebelled. It was the soldiers stationed there, because your Jawan, being a Kisan in uniform, had to reflect the mood of the village. If he got the news that his 48-member clan had died of hunger and famine, it was not going to endear the British officers to that Jawan. That's where the rebellion came from, this wrongly called Sepoy mutiny. The British were as murderous with pronunciation as they were with people, and there was no Sepoy, there was a Sipahi. But it was not a Sipahi mutiny, it was the greatest agrarian uprising the world had seen. They were also at that time, remember, lots of even big, medium-sized landowners and big landowners had been dispossessed in the province of Awadh, which the British called Oudh. Many people were dispossessed of their lands, millions, and that was an agrarian uprising. You know? And there is a continuity in that resistance, in that spirit of we won't take shit from anybody. That was the great thing about it. So then you come to, I gave you the life expectancy figure, 44.6 trillion, 31 famines. Do you know, all of us have become familiar in the COVID period with the word excess deaths. What does excess deaths mean? It means that if a nation or a society has an annual average of 10x deaths, 1 year they have 15x deaths, 5x is counted as excess deaths because it breaks the average massively. Those 5x, incidentally, how we continue to lie to ourselves as a nation, delusional. How many people do you think died in India of COVID?
Forget the numbers.
Huh?
The numbers were not released by the government.
The numbers are available, the numbers stopped being available once the Vishwa Guru spoke. The first and foremost, WHO said 4.7 million deaths between the start of the lockdown and January-March 22. Okay? Lancet said 4.2 million deaths. Johns Hopkins gave 3 different lists, all of them above 4 million. Global Council for Development, Washington, D.C., 4.9 million deaths. India says 4,81,000 deaths. Now, what happens is that you make a lie like that, apart from kidding yourself and deluding yourself, you're going to be contradicted by the rest of your government department's data.
Yes.
So do you know that the man who presides over India's National Family Health Survey has lost his job? Because he published the survey data which showed unbelievable features and indicators of ill health. That guy lost his job. He's a fine researcher and officer. Yeah. First they brought him under charges, suspended him on charges of corruption. This is the new game. Journalists are no longer being arrested on sedition. We are being arrested under money laundering. Working sedition is passé. Now suppose you put me under sedition and I take this book with me to court, a book on patriotism, and it's not going to go down well. But if you put me under money laundering, you will think, hey, maybe there's something this guy has been doing that's wrong. Economic offenses stick very differently. Right? So that's what they're doing now. Anyway, so that's the point of this is, how many excess deaths do you think there were in British rule? Demographers have been working, and each year the number of Indians who died under British rule goes up. The latest, unfortunately, came after my book went to press. Professor Jason Hickel and Dylan Sullivan, economic demographers. They've taken a 40-year period, 1880 to 1920. Why those 40 years? Because robust data, one, it is the height of British imperialism. After that, there is a decline from World War I onwards. But they take those 40 years because you have 4 censuses to look at the data. 1871 is the first census. Then you drop one. So what you have is data that you can compare with earlier sets. You have a data set, right? So what do you think? How many Indians do you think excess deaths there were in those 40 years? Anyone want to take a guess?
10x.
There are 3 estimates because they say, depending on the assumption you take and the base year you take, you will get different figures. But for 40 years on British census and related data, 100 million human beings died. That is the minimum figure, lower end figure. Now, if that's because they're taking the figures from 1881. But please remember that the British have already been there 130 years, ruining your life expectancy for 130 years. So if you compare 1881 death rate 37.7 to 1921 death rate 42.2, that's hideous, but it's not half as great as if you compared it to 1800s, from 1780s, when they established full control across India, right? If you take the British demographers, colonial demographers' assumptions, which is India's life expectancy was similar to that of England, then the number of excess deaths would be 168 million. You can read this paper, it's up on the net in peer-reviewed journals. It's called World Development, the journal. This paper is called A History of Capitalism and Extreme Poverty is the main title, and it talks about global real wages, human height, and extreme poverty in the colonial periods, since the long 16th century, which is really from when colonial expeditions begin and Columbus lands up and initiates the genocide of Native Americans in this country, which, by the way, is the highest percentage genocide of any genocide in history. 98% of Native Americans are wiped out in the next 500 years. Even in Hitler's Holocaust, the highest were Roma, Gypsies. The Roma people, 72% of all Roma were destroyed. The Jews were 68% of all European Jewry were destroyed. Those are the figures. 98% North America, and similar 90-odd% Australian Aboriginals. They are the other group that is destroyed on that scale. Okay. Anyway, so 100. Now, just think, 168 million excess deaths. Remember that India then included Pakistan, Bangladesh, parts of Burma, all these. However, I put it to you, had 1% of 1% of these deaths occurred in a European country, you'd be screaming genocide, like they did in Bosnia. But 168 million worthless brown lives don't matter. Anyway, this is why Indians rose against colonialism. It broke the hearts of the old men and women in this book when last October, India lowered its flag for Queen Elizabeth's death. The British monarchy, the symbol of the plunder, loot and rape of India, you lowered your flag. Do you know something even more disgraceful you did? You changed the rules of the flag code. In India there is a law. Flags may only be made of khadi. Yeah, and they can only, so there are villages, weavers in this country, hundreds of them, maybe a few thousand, who are dependent on 2 days in the year to make money. One is Republic Day, one is Independence Day. Okay? One is Republic Day, one is Independence Day. And Azadi Ka Amrut Mahotsav brought a new program which said, Har Ghar Ka Tiranga. Now you can't get so many Tiranga. So they changed the rule and said you can make it of polyester. At the end of which I called it the Reliance Chinese flag. Because those are the only two sources. Those are the only two sources that have that much polyester. Do you know that in Tamil Nadu, villagers from one of those villages that have been making that flag for 100 years marched in protest to Chennai. 9 hours march. In UP, they were beaten up by police when protesting. At least that didn't happen in Tamil Nadu. But this is the kind of things we have done with our history and this erasure. Along come these ordinary people. I'm going to tell you 3 stories, show you 2 videos of 2 minutes each. And we're done. Let me start with the women's stories because women are so marginalized in our writing of history. Let me tell you the story of Hausabai Patil. Hausabai Patil, her story, she was part of the, I told you Captain Bao looted the train. His underground army was called Tufan Sena, the whirlwind army or the typhoon army. The Tufan Sena was the armed wing of a provisional government called Prati Sarkar. You'll find it in the Marathi textbooks. There will be 1 page, nothing very much, but there is at least a mention of who Nana Patil was. One of the first farmers to become a member of parliament, Nana Patil. So, in 1943, many provinces, Chittagong, Satara, Midnapur, Koraput, declared secession from the British Empire because the British were very weak. They needed every soldier to defend England from Hitler. But the Satara uprising was unique. They took control of 600 villages and held the British at bay for 3 years and only dissolved their government. It's a government of farmers and laborers. And they dissolved their government when Gandhi in 1946 said, okay, everybody come back now, come back. It's time to come back to one, because independence has been announced for 47. These were all, by the way, people who used to be great admirers of Gandhi, who denounced him and broke away because they felt he had compromised on the Quit India movement. They came back on his call, showing you that they never hated him, they disagreed with him. They disagreed with him, but they heeded him when they agreed that it was time to come back. Hausabai Patil, as a young girl, was part of the Tufan Sena. Her story begins in 1943 in front of the Bhavani Nagar police station in Sangli. In those days, Sangli was part of Satara. It becomes a separate district only in the 70s. So, she is in front of the police station, behind her the railway station. She is being beaten to a pulp. She is being beaten to a pulp by an abusive, drunken husband, thrashing her. And the police are sitting in their station watching. They don't. Why should they do anything? Arey yaar, man beating wife, national sport. So why should we do anything? Then the guy picks up, and her brother is there. She's appealing to her brother, Hausabai. Take me with you. If you send me with this man, he'll kill me tonight. The brother, good Indian brother, says, no, you belong to your husband. You are his property, go with him. And meanwhile, abusive husband picks up a rock and says, now I'm going to smash your skull. Then the police come out. Man beating wife is one thing, man murdering wife on the doorstep of the police station will lead to some, uncomfortable questions. So they come out, they stop it, they break up the couple, They scold them, lecture them for God knows how long, reconcile them, and say, now get the hell out of here, get onto that bloody train and leave, go back to your village. Hausabai says, Sahib, we don't have any money. This moron drank it all in alcohol. So the police escort them, put them on the train. 74 years later, Hausabai is telling me, they put tickets in my hand. I don't know if the police paid for the tickets, but they put tickets in my hand. And they steamed off into the sunset. In those days, steam locomotives. And the police returned, satisfied with the job well done. They returned to find that while they were away, Hausabai's comrades in the revolutionary underground have looted the police station of all its weapons, ammunitions, money, everything. That wasn't her husband. He was a comrade in the revolutionary underground. That wasn't her brother. That was another comrade in the revolutionary underground. And the whole drama was staged to get the police out of the station and loot their station, which is how, from the time of Alluri Sitarama Raju in Andhra, they got weapons. They got weapons by looting the police stations. Rampa Chodavaram. Anyone from any Telugu person will know the meaning of that area. Rampa Chodavaram and the Rampa Fitturi of Alluri Sitarama Raju. She did this many times in different dramas. The next year she crossed the Mandovi River at its widest point at midnight. That was no cruise around the Mandovi. Those days, the only things cruising around the Mandovi were very large numbers of crocodiles. Even now they're there. And because they were smuggling weapons from Portuguese-held Goa into Ratnagiri, Maharashtra to fight the British. 74 years later, I'm asking her, Hausabai, what is your most enduring memory of that event? She says, most enduring memory. All of these people, all these old people, they have some common characteristics. They're very cantankerous. And they've been fighting for some cause for 80 years. So if they think that you are trying to undermine that, they get very irritated very easily. They also share a sense of humor. I'm asking Hausabai, what is your most enduring memory? She says, I carry it on my back. That scoundrel comrade, he beat me too hard. Then I said, Hausabai, didn't you tell him to stop? She said, I was screaming at him to stop. But he was saying, Hausabai, it has to look authentic, only then the police will come. She was laughing when she said that. Or you consider the case of Salihan. Saliha is a village which I went to in October to give her descendants the copy. In the first half of October, I made a tour of many of the places where these freedom fighters live or have died and their families live. We gave each and every one of them a copy of the book. And promised to return when the book comes in their language with another copy. Odia. It's already come in 4 English, Marathi, Telugu, and English and Kannada. And Kannada. It has come in these 4 languages. So Saliha is a village in Noapada area of Odisha. When the rest of the country, when the coastal areas, Gujarat, all were having salt satyagraha, the landlocked areas had forest satyagraha. They refused to pay the timber tax. They put up huge protests against all these things. Then the British, the standard punishment for a rebellious village? The first thing the British did on coming to your village was to burn all your stored grain. The most common punishment. In fact, it was the first punishment. They would pull out all the grain stores from everybody's house and burn it so that you knew, don't mess with the British Empire. So they were doing that in Saliha, which was a village of Sabar tribals. Even today, one of the poorest tribes of Odisha, which has many tribes. So, a guy called Karthik Sabar was an underground organizer for the Congress party. He was shot by the incoming troops. And he was lying on the floor. He was lying on the floor bleeding. And a young boy ran to the forest. These are hunter-gatherers, that Sabar tribe. And they have a tiny bit of agriculture, but mainly they're hunter-gatherers. And all the young girls were working in the jungle with big lathis, because you run into big apes, monkeys, baboons, all these sort of creatures. So and he goes there and tells the girl called Demati Dei Sabar. Demati is the name of the girl. Your father's been shot. This rising is recorded in the Nagpur Gazetteer also, though it doesn't mention her. Everybody in that area knows her. She is legendary. She runs to the village followed by 40 other girls. Now, please understand, to have been girls working in the village in that, you must have been between 13 and 15 and you were unmarried. Because if you were more than 15, you would be married off and go to another village, which happens to her after this incident. So we know that she was barely 16. She comes there, sees the man with the gun standing over her dad. British white Gora officer. She loses it, takes the lathi, thrashes him. He is dropping, his weapon falls. She's chasing him around the village, beating him. The other 40 girls, inspired by this, attack the rest of the raiding party. And a bunch of Adivasi teenagers between 13 and 16 chase out a British attacking party armed with guns. One of the greatest moments in Indian freedom struggle, right? I met her in 1998, the last time, dying of hunger, emaciated to the bone, but still looking very capable of wielding a lathi. And she was, and do you know that? I asked her, did you get any recognition from the state? She was very proud. She went and brought a piece of multicolored paper given by the local bloody district administration, which praised her for being the daughter of freedom fighter Karthik Sabar. Another great achievement of hers, she gave birth to 3 boys. She had 3 girls also, but girls, I mean. Right. So, we all went out to try getting her the proper recognition and everything else. Today there's a pillar in Saliha village. When she got married and went to the next village, Purena, there she was known as Salihan, the one who came from Saliha. So we know of her as Demati De Sabar Salihan. There's a pillar with 19 names of those who rose in Saliha against the British. Her name is not there, nor is her father's name there. And there are names of caste which could not have been present in that deep jungle village. You know, Sahus, Telis, they could not, that was an all Adivasi village with maybe 5 Dalits in it. Adivasis often in Odisha use Dalits as the interface with the outside world. They feel that the Dalits are smarter, they know how to cope with the outside world. So suddenly on this pillar, I don't find Sabar names, though it was a Sabar village and a Sabar uprising. This is Saliha. The third person, I'm going to show you the video. Mallu Swarajam. All these people, if you ask me who was my favorite, all of them were. Mallu Swarajam I knew much longer than I knew Salihan or Hausabai. Mallu Swarajam was the odd person out in social background. She was the daughter of a landlord in Telangana, in the most feudal part of India. Even today, it's one of the most beautiful areas. So there was this huge uprising. You all know the communist uprising of Telangana uprising, 1943 to 46. Mallu Swarajam at age 11 rebels against her family and joins the underground movement. She's attending Marxist study classes at age 11. Then, at age 13, she is killing Razakars, you know the Nizam's militia. She's killing Razakars with a slingshot. In 2014, when she is aged 84, I'm interviewing her for an audience of 1,500 techies, aged 21 to 25. Now, you have to ask some questions to which you know the answers, because the audience does not know. They don't even know the question. She was getting irritated with me. You know all this already. You know that. Anyway, she's sitting on the stage and tell her, Swarajam Garu, I've also seen Irulas kill rabbits and birds with slingshot. I've seen the Bondas hunt wild boars with a slingshot, stunning it on the head. But is it really a weapon, useful weapon in close-up human combat? Of course, I knew that already for 40 years, children in Gaza and West Bank were using slingshots. They didn't have any other weapons. But I didn't say that. I just said, is it seriously a weapon? You have to watch her. She got mad. She immediately stood up from the chair and pulled out a slingshot and put a cricket ball in it and started swinging it. Then she sees all the terrified faces in front of her. Then she says, okay, I'll remove this stone and keep it aside, and removes the cricket ball and rejects anyone trying to help her do it. She is ramrod straight. And I'm going to show you 2 minutes of that video, 2 minutes of Captain Bao, and one of the last living, still articulate Dalit freedom fighters, Shobharam Geharwar. Mallu is then asked questions by, when she does that, by the way, the 1,500 below 25 years techies stood up and gave her a standing ovation, and they were to repeat that ovation 3 more times because of the answers she gave them. She didn't speak a word of English, but she read, and she was very well read through her party journals and newspapers about what. She was, by the way, a vice president of the All India Democratic Women's Association. Very well known to Brinda, very close. And they ask her, Swarajam Garu, it's wonderful, you did all this. And incidentally, by the time she was 16, can you imagine this happening in India today? In 1946, at the age of 16, the Telangana uprising appoints her the leader of all the armed squads, the Dalams, in the main area of Warangal Bayaram, which is the epicenter of the rebellion. A girl of 16 is put in charge of male, female fighters, everybody. And that time she's using a rifle. The kids asked her, Mallu Garu, Swarajam Garu, it's all very well for you. You say you fought for justice. We appreciate that. We admire you. But you fought for justice with slingshots and rifles. They are just techies. What do we do? She asked them, oh, you're techies. Have you ever heard of Occupy Wall Street? That was full of techies. It was, by the way. There is the gaping, the audience is stunned. She said, what do you think those people were? They were all techies like you. They were your age. Then she said, when they said, you know, we can't go around using slingshots and rifles like you fighting for justice. She gave one-line reply that brought the audience to its feet. Yes, I fought for justice with slingshot and rifle. Yes, the slingshot was my weapon. The laptop and the mobile phone are yours. Use those to fight for justice. Audience rose. Every one of those 1,500 kids rose and gave her a standing ovation for the third time. It was to happen one more time. This was who Mallu Swarajam was. Here, let me show you that incident of Mallu.
దీనిని పట్టుకొని ఇలా తిప్పి 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 మార్చే పోలీసులు పట్టాలి. ఆనాడు 4,000 మంది అమరులైన సామాన్యమైనటువంటి రైతులు, హరిజన గిరిజన జనం మా కళ్ళ ముందే ప్రాణాలను అర్పించి పోరాటం ఉంటే ఆ పోరాటంలో తుపాకులు అందుకొని రాళ్ళు అందుకొని వర్షాలు తీసుకొచ్చి నన్ను చూపించడానికి ఆడవాళ్ళు మగవాళ్ళు ఆ కూడలిదానికి వ్యతిరేకంగా ఊరుకు ఊరు ఏకమై గడిల మీద ఇలాంటి ఒడిశాలలో ఒక రాయి, ఇందులో బాల్ ఉంది, బహుశా ఈ బాల్ కూడా గట్టిగానే ఉంది, మీ దగ్గరికి వస్తే దెబ్బ తాకుతుంది, అందుకని పెడుతున్నా నేను. చెప్తాను. దీనిని పట్టుకొని ఇలా తిప్పి 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 మార్చే పోలీసులు పట్టాలి.
Last interview at age 92.
దళాల లీడరు, ఒక దళం కాదు, ఏరియా దళాలకు నేను క్యాంపు జోగిలు.
That is Mallu Swarajam with a rifle at age 16 in a photograph the Communist Party archives think was taken by the police. What a figure she cuts. This is 16. You can see the absolute straight edge. At age 84, you saw her still so ramrod straight.
ట్రైనింగ్ అంటే మార్క్సిస్ట్ సిద్ధాంతం చెప్పడానికి, మార్క్సిస్ట్ సిద్ధాంతం చెప్పడానికి కాసుకంతో నేను పోలీసుల మీద పడితే ఎట్లా ఎదిరిస్తారో చెప్పారు. ఆ తర్వాత మేము చాలా టెక్నిక్ చేసినాం. ఇంత కాదు, కళ్ళలో కారం కొట్టడం, దుమ్ము కొట్టడం, మన పట్టడం, పొడవని తీసుకుపోయి పొడవడం, ఆఖరికి నరకమన్నం మీద పడి అత్యాచారం చేస్తుంటే మరి ఎట్లా అంటే ఎట్లా గిట్టలేదు నరకమన్నం నరికేసి, రంగాన్ని నరికేసి. అది గెరిలా పోరాటం చేసిండ్రు జనతోనే గెరిలా పోరాటం చేసిండ్రు, వాళ్ళే చేసిండ్రు మాకు నేర్పి.
Please notice she says, we did not lead the masses, the people made leaders of us. Again, a rejection of the great man theory. We did not go there as leaders. The people made us leaders. The people threw up leaders. That is the last Dalit fighter for freedom in alive, age 98. He is such a moving person to meet. He is about 6 feet 1 inch or 6 feet 2. Walks faster than I do, and I walk fast. This guy, he really destroys all the stupid, worthless debates going on. Ambedkar versus Gandhi, all these things. He was a firm Gandhian, self-declared Gandhian. A very great admirer and follower of Baba Sahib Ambedkar, and participated in the revolutionary underground making bombs. This Gandhian, he made bombs. And he told me, I asked him about, he said, मैंने दोनों नदियां में गया. Gandhivad or Krantivad? I went in both rivers, Gandhianism and revolutionism. Then he said, you know, this 98-year-old lives for one thing only. He will not, he tries to keep himself alive for one thing. He is defending, every week he goes there as often as he can get there. Sometimes he walks there a huge distance to the freedom fighters' Bhavan in Ajmer, the historic place. He took me there and said, see all those fellows looking over the fence. This is our real estate mafia. They're waiting for me to die. The moment I die, they will grab this historic place. I have shared my story with you. You tell Ashok Gehlot, same party there. You tell Ashok Gehlot that state should declare this as public property, state property, and build a museum for future generations so that they know what our struggles and sacrifices were. Then he said, you got a jeep in India, any SUV is a jeep for older generation. So he said, take me to the Ambedkar statue. It was April 14th, Ambedkar Jayanti. And he wanted to put garlands. Like I was frightened with Mallu, I was frightened of asking him questions. After he put that garland mala around Ambedkar, I said, Shobharamji, how does a Dalit like you choose between Gandhi and Ambedkar? He got furious. Choose. Why should I choose? You choose. Who are you to tell me to choose? Those principles of the Mahatma I revere, I follow those. Those principles of Baba Saheb I revere, I follow those. Who are you to tell me that I have to choose one or the other? It just destroyed all years of useless arguments and debates in 3 lines. And I asked him about who participated in the freedom struggle. In the book you will find every political force, congressmen, socialists, communists, everybody except one political force. Let him tell you about it.
हम जो है बम बनाते थे म्यूजियम में और हम लोग सप्लाई करते थे बच्चों को। हाँ बम्बई नहीं आ रहे
सप्लाई
कहाँ ले जा रहे हैं कहाँ फ्रेंड बोल भी दिया लोग कहते भाई खुद तुम आओ तो हम लोग पकड़े जाएंगे बड़े आदमी तो मतलब बच्चा जाके छोड़ के देगा चंद्रशेखर आजाद और एक और था वो फैक्ट्री देगा तो ले जाके फिर उन्होंने जो अच्छे मजे देगी से देखते थे और वो चिट्ठियों को भी अब डाक को पहुंचाना बड़ा मायना रखता था तो हमारी जोड़ी बनाई उन्होंने हमें ट्रेनिंग दी कि भाई इस माफिक से आपको ये चिट्ठी फलाने जगह पहुंचानी है बड़ौदा का देनी है डॉक्टर अम्बेडकर को सिकंदर खाने में पूछता नहीं ना कोई किताब है जो पढ़ेगा कि हमने सारे क्या मालूम ये सब खागे देश को छोड़ो अभी तो वो नहीं
स्वतंत्र संग्राम में आरएसएस ट्रेन
इसमें उम्र भी नहीं करते
30 more seconds from one video of Captain Bao, and we're done. But I wanted to tell you that both books are here available for you. You can't pay me in this room. Okay? We are following the regulations of the library, but you can send something by a QR code to a foundation, and or you can pay cash to the organizers outside the hall. Captain Bao. What a character. Another cantankerous old fellow. I asked him, when did you join the Tufan Sena? You'll see him getting irritated. Here on film, he's been polite relatively. When I said, when did you join the Tufan Sena? He said, damn it. What do you mean, when did I join it? I founded the damn thing. He got very angry. Another time I asked him about Captain Bao. When you looted the train, he got very angry. हमने कुछ लूट नहीं किया. जो अंग्रेज ने लूट किया इस देश से, हमने थोड़ा सा वापस लिया. Then we asked him, Captain Bao, I'm just showing you short clips, but one of the more beautiful things, when we put that chair on the railway track, he remembered everything and spoke for an hour and a half, saying there were two squads, one in front of the train, one behind the train. We put rocks on both sides, and he recalled the name of each and every member of the squads. वो पाटिल का लड़का ना वो था, हाँ वो शिंदे वो मोरे वो भी था. He remembered the name. It brought back everything to him coming to the place where he had. Yeah. And one of the things which is not there, which I asked him was, what did you? How did you? Did they have guns? Did you also use guns? He said, huh? किसके पास में? Who had guns? What guns did he have? This is before the Tufan Sena and House of I start looting everything. He said, we didn't have law. I said, what about the guy? Didn't they have guns? He said, yeah, there was a guard on the train, he had guns. He was paralyzed with fear, he gave it to us. And when I asked him about were you ill-treated in jail, he was not ill-treated in jail because he was a legend in that area. All the jailers, the soldiers, the guards, all came from his villages. So you see what he says about how he was treated in jail.
माझं नाव रामचंद्र श्रीपती लाड. मला कॅप्टन भाऊ या नाव.
Sorry.
मला सगळीकडे परिचित असताना मी मारून 1942च्या स्वातंत्र्याच्या चळवळीमध्ये वयाच्या 15-16व्या वर्षी मी सामील झालो. तुफान सेना मी स्थापनच केली. त्याच्यामुळे सामील होण्याचा प्रश्नच येत नाही. ती सेना स्थापन केली आणि त्या सेनेमध्ये आम्ही जिल्ह्यातील सर्व लोकांना सुरुवात केलं. इंग्रज तर गेलंच पाहिजे, परंतु त्याच्यानंतर मिळणारं स्वातंत्र्य आहे ते जनतेचं स्वातंत्र्य झालं पाहिजे, हा आमचा त्यातला मुख्य दावा होता आणि त्या पद्धतीनं आम्ही आमचे प्रयत्न करत होतो. गाड़ी आने के पहले 15 मिनट यहाँ पत्थर रखा गाड़ी में आगे हाँ गाड़ी आली आणि गाडीने ते दगड धोटे पाहिले. गाडी रुकली गेली. पाठीमाग आमची दुसरी फळी उभा होती. त्या फळीनं लगेच पाठीमाग गाडीला रोखली. गाडीवरती त्या रोळावरती दगड रोखली. गाडी जाग्यावर थांबली. त्याच्यामुळे गाडी पुढे येता येईना, गाडी मागे येता येईना. पगाराचीच गाडी होती, त्याच्यामुळे पगाराचे पैसे होते ते घेतले आणि निघून गेलो. भूमिगत लोकांना जीवन जगण्याकरता आणि ज्या ठिकाणी काही खर्च करावा लागेल अशा ठिकाणी खर्च करण्याकरता त्या पैशाचा वापर केला. घरगुती स्वरूपात कोणी पैशाचा वापर केला नाही. गाडी लुटली म्हणतात हा आमच्यावरती अन्यायच आहे. आमचाच पैसा आम्ही हस्तगत केला. गाडी लुटली नाही, आमचा पैसा आम्ही घेतला. पोलीस सुद्धा आमच्याकडे याला भेट होती. सरकारचा आदेश म्हणून रात्री संरक्षणाला हात लावायची ताकद नव्हती कोणाची, अशी ती अवस्था होती. आणि औंधला तरी काय राजाच्या घरी असल्यासारखंच होतो. राजाच्या घरी असल्यासारखं स्वातंत्र्याच्या, जनतेच्या स्वातंत्र्याच्या कल्पना भव्य आणि दिव्य आहेत. पण त्या पद्धतीनं आम्ही स्वातंत्र्य राबवतोय असं वाटत नाही. ठराविक लोकांचीच मक्तेदारी धरण्याची अवस्था झालेली आहे. ज्याच्या हाती ससा तो पारधी अशी अवस्था झाली आहे त्या स्वातंत्र्याची.
After independence, by the way, he went to the Shetkari Kamgar Paksh, that is the Peasants and Workers Party. Yeah. Swarajya went to the CPI and then the CPM. There was one person whom I didn't speak to you about, who I should have, which is Baji Muhammad, more Gandhian than Gandhi, a Muslim eccentric who headed the Anti-Cow Slaughter League of Odisha, who cycled 3,000 kilometers to Gujarat to meet Gandhi and asked Gandhi, what should we do? And Gandhi told him, Jao, lati khao, that will be your contribution. So he went, then he wrote to Gandhi, Bahut kaya, lati. What more do you want me to do? Gandhi said, aur kuch khao. Aur kuch khao, lati. And this man was placed in an unbelievable prison that I have seen. It is now used for a garbage shed, for a stationary shed in the Tehsildar's office in Jaipur, Koraput. In 6 feet by 8 feet, 6 to 8 of them were kept there, and they had to shit in a terracotta pot, and one of them would take it out and accompanied by a guard with a rifle, and they would throw it at the edge of the forest and come back. But his worst beating he ever received was in 1992, when he, along with 500 other Gandhians, sat outside the Babri Masjid asking the violent car sevaks to spare the building and not. They could immediately recognize him as a Muslim because of his cap. They hit his head with a crowbar when he went to drink water. He spent 1 month in hospital, and the thing that never ceases to amaze me, because I could not be like that, not an iota of anger towards the British or towards the Bajrang Dal. No anger, because Gandhi told him that's a wrong thing. That's it. Okay? So these are the kind of people the book is about. I think that apart from all of you, I really want your children and grandchildren also to read it. If you have any questions for me, I'm willing to try and answer. Thank you very much for your patience. Yeah.
So listening to you was like watching a movie, because you know so much about the subject and you experienced it and so on. And you make a very good point that independence was an event and freedom is a process. So if I was to ask you, what does that process look like? What would that be?
I tell you two things. One is, I believe, and every one of them uses, some of them were totally illiterate. Some of the women never saw a school from outside, let alone from inside. Okay? Like Sally Hunt. But they all, when they tell you what of value to them, you will see that the finest distillation of the idealism of the freedom struggle is in a document you call the Constitution of India. It's there in the preamble, justice for all, social, economic, political. It's there in liberty, equality, fraternity. It's there in, more importantly, in the directive principles of state policy. Right to work, right to health, right to nutrition, right to shelter. That is how each and every one of them talks to you about the misery and the poverty and the fight against inequality. Today's India is exactly facing the levels of inequality that you last saw in 1921 in British India. In 1991, when we embraced the brave new world of neoliberal globalization, there was not a single dollar billionaire in India. Today there are 174. In a population of 1.4 billion, 174 is 0.000014%, and these 174 men, mostly men, sprinkling of women who are usually heads of family of a big house, capitalist house, these 174 individuals, their wealth equals 21 to 24% of gross domestic product. Levels of inequality unheard of at any other time. In fact, when someone is owning more, when 174 guys are owning 1/5 of your GDP, it brings that whole other meaning to the word gross.
True.
Yeah, and so that the issues of the freedom struggle, this is a very contemporary book. The issues of the freedom struggle, the inequality, the misery, those are very much what we are fighting today, and what they said is the fight for freedom. Freedom from hunger, freedom from illiteracy, freedom from poverty, freedom from homelessness. All those things they considered as their fight for freedom. And therefore many of them never stopped fighting. They went on into different political streams after the battle. There's a guy called Sankaraya, 102 years old, who you can see a message, giving a message about the book, because I presented in the copy of the book. Sankaraya was the top, and look at the political mischief that still goes on. Sankaraya at age 19 was the topper in one of the finest colleges of Madras Presidency, the American College Madurai. It was one of the presidency's top 5 colleges. He was the top student, he was topping the university, he was a football player, he was the founder of the Tamil Poetry Society of Women. 15 days before final exams, he was imprisoned because he was very actively, openly in the freedom struggle. And he was released 12 hours before midnight, August 15. He never got his degree. When I wrote the story about him, first in Pari, in People's Archive, thank you. In the end of each chapter, there is a QR code. If you scan the QR code, you will go straight to People's Archive of Rural India, a web page, Gallery of Freedom Fighters. You can see their families, some of them you can see their videos. These videos all are there. But we are still loading more as we edit. Some of them are still alive. So Shankaraya, extraordinary fellow that he was, and he was considered very dangerous. He has never done a violent act till then in his life. But he was too smart for them. So they kept him in prison and shifted him from prison to prison because he had this habit of converting fellow prisoners. Then, so Shankaraya wages a hunger strike in prison. You know what he and his fellows are having the hunger strike for? For the poorer prisoners who are given different treatment and given much less rations. They go on a hunger strike so that all prisoners will get equal rations. Yeah. The IG of prisons makes a surprise visit and finds this 19-year-old reading literature on the 10th day of the strike, hunger strike. And he's just astonished and he says, 10 days you have not eaten a morsel and you are sitting and reading Maxim Gorky's Mother? So that's the kind of guy he was. When I wrote the story about him in Pari, the new government of Tamil Nadu, Stalin, DMK, they created a prize. There are two Tamilians. Nallakanna, his close comrade, one went into CPM, one went into CPI. Nallakanna is the infant of the book, he is 98. The oldest is Babani Mahato, who is 105. And now Shankaraya, the Tamil Nadu government honored him. They created a prize which they say is the state equivalent of Bharat Ratna, 1 million rupees. First year they gave it to him. I did the story on Nallakanna. Second year they gave it to Nallakanna. Do you know what these old guys did with that award? Shankaraya accepted the award with gratitude and returned the 1 million rupees, contributing it to the Chief Minister's COVID Relief Fund.
Wow.
Nallakanna got the award when COVID was over, and he returns the 1 million rupees, adding 5,000 rupees to it, to the CM's relief fund. This is the caliber of people who fought in it. And when I meet Shankaraya at 101, he's grumbling about his family. He used to do lectures, public lectures at 98, 99. He says, I say, these fellows, they won't let me speak because of COVID, they won't let me out of the house. And mind you, he had COVID twice. and his family, how do you blame his family? Then I wrote to Stalin saying, here is your top student in Madras Presidency, one of the top, and in Madurai American College, the top student. Don't you think the university should give him an honorary degree? Stalin announced it 24 hours later, and the Senate and Syndicate of Madurai Kamarajar University, which is the affiliate university for American College, unanimously voted to give him a D.Litt, Doctor of Letters. And the governor of Tamil Nadu, the BJP governor, withheld consent to the D.Litt. They stopped it. And he died a week later without receiving it. Yeah. So you see, many of the politics, the nastiness, the meanness, the political, see, N. Ravi, the governor, his political force never participated in the freedom struggle.
Yeah.
It has no value for them. And it just punishing one of your great freedom fighters, punishing him because you're having a running battle with the DMK government. That's okay. So the battles for freedom, these are all on. Yeah? Yeah.
I was going to ask, in 75 years of independence, if you look at justice for all, different kinds of justice, it seems like things are even worse than what they were 75 years ago. So what reason do we have to hope that there is a...
Oh, I think there's plenty of reason to hope. Two things I will tell you about the hope, meaning of. See, I think that the Kisan Andolan 2020 to 2021 November is the greatest legitimate constitutional democratic protest in the world, organized in this millennium and organized at the height of the pandemic. 720 farmers died of COVID, of police action, of hypothermia. When the farmers arrived at the gates of Delhi, they were met in the worst winter in 40 years. They were met with icy cold water cannon, or So some poor 78 and 181-year-old from, Hoshiarpur, they die. You hit them with icy cold water, they develop pneumonia or hypothermia or whatever and die. 720 people died, some of COVID, some of, illness, some of other ailments. They never gave in. Until, Occupy Wall Street, we said, it lasted 9 weeks. NYPD cleaned up Zuccotti Park. Your government could not do that with the Kisan Andolan. They lasted 53 weeks and the government backed down. They taught us the meaning of resistance. And I'm saying that is the continuum of this spirit of resistance. Whatever happens, we will resist. Okay? Before then, 2018-19, tens of thousands of young college kids, many of them teenagers, fought and protested against the Citizenship Amendment Act, CAA. It brought me tears of joy when I'm seeing my students amongst them standing at the gates of the university and reading from the preamble of the Constitution of India. Justice for all, social, economic, political. Though of course I did tell my students, there are a few other interesting parts also. Read those also. Don't stop with the preamble. But I'm saying that gives me the hope. Nobody went and mobilized them. They gathered in protest. Each learned from another city, they've done it, we'll also do it. So yeah, hope is there. Yeah, I always, there are extremes between cynical pessimism and bogus optimism. Bogus optimism is, economy is growing at 10%, poverty will be history in 60 months. How many prime ministers and finance ministers have told you this since 1991? The ultimate optimist is the fellow who fell from the 50th story of a building. Each floor he passed on the way down, he said, so far so good. The cynical pessimist is the guy who says, kuch sudhrega nahi, nothing's going to change, why should I do anything? Both cynical pessimist and fake optimist achieve the same end. If economy is booming at 10%, why do I need to do anything? I might mess it up. If nothing will change, why should I do anything? Both arrive at the same conclusion. We absolve ourselves of responsibility of doing anything ourselves. That is the thing. But between cynical pessimism and fake optimism is that territory called hope. I live there. Yeah.
All right. I read somewhere that you were awarded Padma Shri, but you refused it.
I was awarded the Padma Bhushan.
Padma Bhushan, I'm sorry.
Not that it matters a damn, but I'm saying, just for the record, I declined the Padma Bhushan because I believe journalists should not accept awards from governments they cover and critique. I also declined the 1 million rupee YSR award in Andhra Pradesh last year, with the result that Jagan Mohan Reddy is not talking to me. Because I knew his father very well, much better than I know Jagan Mohan, and I respected his father, but I do not believe journalists should accept award. I was on the agri mission of Andhra Pradesh. I don't believe. Okay, it's like this. Suppose you were going to invest your money in a company. What will you do, sir? You will read the auditor's reports. You will not just read stock market analysts. You will read auditors' reports to see, okay, external auditors' report, you will read. Suppose you found out that the external auditor was accepting gifts, awards, money from the company he's auditing. You would be furious?
Of course.
Yeah. A journalist is an external auditor to government, in which all your lives are invested, in the company called India.
Do you feel free in Modi's reign? I mean, with the journalists you are.
No, that's absurd. I mean, no one who is actually a journalist can feel free in this regime. Impossible. We have had terrible experiences, and I know that we are going to have even more terrible experiences. But I take one of the great things about the freedom struggle, the role of journalists in it, and the spirit.
Beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you all very
Thank
much.
you.
Unless there is another question, thank you all. And please remember that. Then I'm just stepping out.
Meet you outside for the transaction.
Well, those are the rules.
I know.
Gives a new meaning on
I would know if it was
Yeah.
Goswami.
Yeah. Just take the info.
Nobody hear you.